Hello, and welcome to Nexus. I'm Wanda Allen Abraha, the Director of the Human Relations, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department. We are excited to bring you today's program. The Human Relations DEI Department encourages and enforces ordinances, policies, and procedures that pertain to fair housing, landlord-tenant, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and non-discrimination ordinances. The department has three key divisions from which we work. The first division pertains to housing discrimination and landlord-tenant investigations and enforcement. The second division pertains to the city's non-discrimination ordinances that relate to public accommodations and employment discrimination. And the third division represents our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, which focuses internally on city departments and city employees. All Nexus television programs feature our community partners and the work in which we do. Today, we will be focused on speaking with Drashanta Brinson, who is one of our newest employees with the department, who focuses on the non-discrimination ordinances pertaining to public accommodations and employment. We will also be speaking with Charlie Gardner, who is from the Winston-Salem Foundation. So let's join Adolfo Briceño from our staff, who will interview today's guests.
Well, thank you very much for being with us in this edition of Nexus TV. In this edition, we have a very special guest. She's Ms. Drashanta Brinson. Ms. Drashanta Brinson is an outreach specialist for the Human Relations Department, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department, and specifically she's specifically devoted to the Non-Discrimination Ordinance that we're going to be talking about. Thank you very much for being with us, Ms. Brinson.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to be talking, Ms. Brinson, very briefly about the Non-Discrimination Ordinance. For those who are not aware of the Non-Discrimination Ordinance, this was passed in August of 2021 unanimously by the city of Winston-Salem City Council. And because of that, the Human Relations, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department has now new powers. We can investigate discrimination complaints on employment and also on public accommodations. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, and let's have Ms. Brinson tell us about this ordinance. Ms. Brinson, in general, can you tell us about this new discrimination ordinance and who do they protect? This ordinance.
Certainly, as you stated, as of January 1st, 2022, the Human Relations, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department administers and enforces the non-discrimination ordinances in public accommodations, as well as in employment. So the NDOs apply to residents of Winston-Salem who belong to a protected class and who have experienced discrimination based on that protected class, either as a prospective or current employee or at a place of public accommodation. There are 17 protected classes of persons. And just to name a few: age, color, ethnicity, familial status, gender expression, gender identity, political affiliation. Those are just a few of the protected classes of persons that the NDOs protect.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ms. Brinson. Now, how can citizens file complaints under employment and public accommodations?
To file a complaint, what you would need to do is you would go to our website, and our website is cityofwinston-salem.org/NDO. You can file a complaint there, or you can contact our intake specialist, Carlin Duncan, at carlind@cityofws.org, KARLYND@cityofws.org, and we will get started with that. Complaints must be filed within 60 days of the alleged ordinance violation.
Thank you, Ms. Brinson. That's important to know. Now, are public accommodations and employment discrimination not already covered by pre-existing laws? What will you tell someone that may have that concern?
That's an interesting question because I've heard that a lot. A lot of people are concerned and they're like, well, what's the purpose of the NDOs if the federal law covers these things already? And the truth of the matter is the federal law doesn't cover all of the protected classes of persons in the areas that we cover in the NDOs. Our NDOs are more expansive than federal law. And also to receive protection under federal or state law, a person who's been discriminated against must file a lawsuit in a court of law. And that's time consuming and it's costly and everybody can't afford to do that. So our ordinances is just much faster and it aims to avoid the court system entirely and it's free of cost to both of the parties.
That's great to know, Ms. Brinson. Now, is there training available and how can an organization request it?
Yes, there is training available. We are so excited to be able to roll out our general training at this time. And it basically just covers what the NDOs are, who's protected, brief definitions of each protected class of person, how to file a complaint, the complaint process, and just a lot of information. So that's available to organizations. And all you have to do is go to our website, cityofws.org/NDO, and there's a form that you can complete on the website that will send a request to me, and then I will reach back out to you. Or you can email me at drashontab@cityofws.org and let me know your organization, what kind of training you're specifically requesting, because as time goes on, we do plan on offering trainings for each protected class of person. But right now, we just want to educate the community, the citizen, employers on what the NDOs are and what they covered and how to stay in compliance so that you're not violating those and so that you're not discriminated against and you know your rights.
That's excellent. This is an important job that you have in front of you, Ms. Brinson, with this non-discrimination ordinance. Is there a plan of or a schedule of how this training will be will go advance in the future? What can people expect with that? I mean, somebody that's hearing this show and they say, "Hey, that's interesting. I would like to have a training." Is there any? What's the calendar? What's the plan behind it?
So we're just getting started and we're pretty flexible. In my mind and in our mind as a department, we have planned on putting at least 2 trainings for every single month. However, we realize that a lot of community partners and organizations, their meetings are after hours. So, trainings are available during the daytime at 11, 12 o'clock on Monday through Friday. We can also accommodate doing some trainings that are after 5 o'clock, which is when most people are available, especially if it's an organization outside of their regular workday. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of when we can train and how we can train. Right now, we are just offering training via Zoom, given the state of our nation during the pandemic. At some point we hope to move past that and be able to present those trainings in person, but right now they'll be via Zoom. And again, if anyone is interested in training or knows any organization that you think would benefit from training regarding NDOs, just please reach out to me. I would love to work with you and getting something like that scheduled and just figuring out the logistics of that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Brinson. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think it is important to add before we wrap up?
Not in particular. I do think that it's important to visit the website. Our website covers a lot of information and it will answer a lot of questions that one might have about the NDOs. I think starting there is just something that we need to put out there. Like, please visit the website, please read it, please get an understanding of it. And we're here as a department for the needs of organizations and the needs of the citizens. So just know that we're available.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much, Ms. Brinson, for your time. And thank you very much, folks, for paying attention to this edition of Nexus. Now, just remember, as Ms. Brinson said, the non-discrimination ordinance, it is already, we can apply it now as it is starting from the 1st of January 2022. Yes. We can investigate discrimination complaints on employment and public accommodations, and Ms. Brinson is the person that is in charge of educating the public about all the things that have to do with this non-discrimination ordinance. Thank you again for your time, Ms. Brinson, and thank you, folks at home, for for still stay with us. And please do stay with us because we'll have a second guest in our second segment of Nexus TV. Stay with us.
The Fair Housing Act became law in 1968. Landlords may not discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, family status, or disability. If you think you've been discriminated against, call 311 and ask for the Human Relations Department. Fair housing, it's the law. A message from the Winston-Salem Human Relations Department.
En Winston-Salem no se le puede negar un lugar para vivir debido a su raza, color, origen nacional, estado familiar, sexo, religión o discapacidad. La vivienda justa es la ley.
Well, thank you very much for still being with us in this edition of Nexus TV. In the second segment of Nexus TV, and my name is Adolfo Brusino, by the way. In our second segment of Nexus TV, we have a very special guest. He's Mr. Charlie Gardner. Mr. Gardner is Program Officer at the Winston-Salem Foundation for Building an Inclusive Economy. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Mr. Gardner.
You did. Thank you, Adolfo.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Gardner. We're going to talk very briefly about an exhibit that's called the Undesigned exhibit. Let's delve in. Can you tell us, Mr. Gardner, what is the Undesigned, the Redline exhibit?
Yeah, the Undesigned the Redline exhibit is an interactive exhibit that really integrates some national trends around the history of redlining and kind of help introduce what this policy has been and how it impacted our community. And it also integrates a lot of local stories as well. So there's a few different sections. Then the first section really kind of gives a background about redlining, how it arose, just some of the basic details about it. Then there's another section that is a timeline of events that really shows how redlining impacted the community and how people responded to this policy and how people are and how it really again shaped our community. And then we also have a section on oral interviews about local residents' experience of segregation and around this time period. And then also finally kind of how can we continue to undesign and work to undo and repair the harm of redlining our community.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. But for those who do not know, what is redlining? Can you briefly explain that practice?
Yeah, so redlining was a policy that started in the 1930s. Really, this was in the midst of the Great Depression, and the federal government was trying to create programs that would build wealth for Americans who are really struggling, across the board. Unfortunately, this policy, the government decided to only open up to white families and white households, and it was a discriminatory from the very beginning. And with redlining, it's the federal government created a 30-year low-interest mortgage. At that time, if you wanted to buy a home, you usually had to put 50% down payment, and the interest was usually high, and the term was maybe like 10 years, so it's pretty short. So it wasn't open to many people. So they created a 30-year mortgage, low interest, that people could put down minimal down payment, sometimes 0%, sometimes 10%. And again, this was only open to white families. And they did that by creating maps of over 200 of the largest cities in the United States. And they had people who surveyed the different neighborhoods and based upon race, made color-coded maps upon where banks and financial institutions could make loans and where those could not. And this was solely based upon the matter of race. So if you were in a white neighborhood, it was usually labeled either blue or green. And if you were in a mixed or purely made up of purely black, so people of color, then it was either yellow or red, and that's where redlining comes from.
That's very interesting, Mr. Gardner. Thank you for that. Now, what inspired the Winston-Salem Foundation to bring this exhibit to Winston-Salem? Yeah,
so the Winston-Salem Foundation has been really working to promote, economic development, community development in Forsyth County, and several years ago began to understand how, if we're making grants in education, we're making grants, in community development, healthcare, other arts, all sorts of things. We often think about the issues that are being addressed as separate issues, but the exhibit begins to help us understand that many of these disparate things that we're trying to address aren't separate. They often have a common root cause. And a lot of this can be traced back to this racist policy and discriminatory policy about building wealth, and also disinvesting of building wealth for white families and disinvesting in communities of color. And so my colleague saw an exhibit in the same exhibit in Cleveland, because this is the national exhibit that travels around the country, and saw it in Cleveland and thought, this just resonated with many of the things that we were hearing from the community, that we wanted to bring it here to help people better understand how redlining shaped our city. So we think about Winston-Salem, East Winston versus the West Winston, and we often have different perceptions of these different neighborhoods, and without really understanding how these neighborhoods, the different disparities found in these neighborhoods were really a cause of intentional policy going back, almost 100 years.
I see. Well, that's very interesting, and to have that historic perspective with this. Now, Mr. Gardner, this is an interactive exhibit that we will have, but are there any local stories that stood out while this was housed at the Central Library? Because probably people do not know, but this exhibit was at some point at the Central Library. But is there anything that stood out in these local stories here in Winston-Salem about redlining?
Yeah, so one thing was just really the vibrant, vibrant communities that were found in Winston-Salem, that were, Black neighborhoods that go all the way back to, the Moravians. In Happy Hill was this Black neighborhood that was right up the hill from Old Salem. And you have that, you have the Black business district around, which is now the Innovation Quarter. You have, Cleveland Heights, Boston Thurman. You have, these rich neighborhood histories. And unfortunately, many of these neighborhoods were destroyed with the building of highways, with the building of 52. Basically went right through Happy Hill neighborhood, with the building University went right to Boston Thurman. You had the building of the Salem Parkway with 421/Business 40 that went right through many of the neighborhoods on the east side, and then even through neighborhoods in the West Salem that were Black neighborhoods. And so you begin to have this, this not only did redlining prevent banks from lending in communities of color that were pretty affluent, but it also then throughout other policies that were kind of stacked on top of it, really displaced them. And even despite this, there are, many of the residents that we spoke to who had great memories of, the Black business district and kind of in that area. And, there was a lot of the Black community created a lot of institutions because they didn't have access to other institutions. They created them for themselves. So a great example is K.D. Reynolds Hospital or KD Hospital, or really the Safe Bus Company. So these were two institutions that were, because the Black residents couldn't go get medical treatment elsewhere, they built this hospital, and it became the third largest hospital in the country that served Black people. And then with the Safe Bus Company, the same thing. It became the largest Black transit back-run transit system in the country. And unfortunately, in the 60s and 70s, as desegregation was happening, these institutions were forced to close or merge because of there was powers that be basically said, oh, now you don't need your own hospital because you can come over to the hospital on the west side. But of course, the service and the treatments were not the same, and there's still these big gaps in those communities because of this. So, you know, redlining was started in the 1930s and officially into the 1970s, but there were many other policies that kind of went along with this that really, really harmed that community even beyond that. And so I think that's some things that we need to grapple with as a community. How can we, again, know about this, the needs in these communities? How can we reinvest resources in the communities too? I hope that this exhibit has that effect of having those conversations in our community, Mr. Gardner. Now, for folks who do not know, April is Fair Housing Month, and it has been Fair Housing Month for probably over 50 years now. But how does this exhibit ties into the Fair Housing Month, Mr. Gardner? Yeah, so of course, there's a central aspect of redlining is about access to housing and building wealth, but there was, you know, so there was the whole aspect of housing, and right now I know the community is facing a dearth of affordable housing. I think there was like 16,000 units short of what there needs to be. But there was one story in particular that was, we had some oral interviews, and there was a resident who was a senior elderly Black man who used to work for, I made a utility company, I believe. And he and his wife were needing to find an apartment. And so they saw us an ad in the paper, went to the apartment, which happened to be in the Ardmore neighborhood. And as soon as they showed up with the ad in hand, the agent there said, oh, actually, we have no more vacancies, you know, there's no spot for you, and didn't even take an application. And this man shared it with his colleagues who were primarily white, including one who was also a pastor that they had formed friends with. And so his colleague went back to the same day, went back to this apartment complex and asked about it, and he immediately showed a couple of different units, got an application down, and he shared this story with his colleague, and he said basically how he believed that discrimination happened. And so, like, I think this story resonated with me. You know, I'm a white male, and oftentimes we are skeptical when we hear about stories of discrimination that are happening by people in our community. And I think this story just really revealed that rather being skeptical, I think we need to trust when people experience discrimination, that even if you may never have been discriminated for before, it happens in our community even today. And so again, the impact and the legacy of redlining continue today, and that we still need to find ways to address it. It's not something we're over. Yes, thank you for that. I think that that's also a very important reflection in our times, that discriminatory practices are not a thing of our past, but they can be still very much present with us, unfortunately. Now, Mr. Gardner, where can people see the exhibit now? Yeah, so as you shared, the exhibit had been at the Central Library for a few months, but we're very grateful that the City of Winston-Salem will be hosting it in City Hall between April 8th and May 6th to coincide with Fair Housing Month. And I believe that this coincides with some other events and programming that the city is planning around the Fair and Affordable Housing Summit, which I think is April 21st. And there's going to be some trainings and some also in-person tours of the exhibit as well. And so for information about the exhibit, you can visit the website wsfoundation.org/undesigned. Again, wsfoundation.org/undesigned, and there'll be more information on how to visit the exhibit, the hours, the programming. Also, the exhibit wasn't brought here just by the foundation. We have, I believe, 21 community partners of organizations who touch many different issues, rather with history, but also education, healthcare, economic development, community development, all sorts of things. And so you can also visit the website to find out organizations in our community that are working to address redlining, the impact in the legacy of redlining today.
That's great. So the information that I have for the time being, this is for the public, of course, is that this exhibit will take place here in the city of Winston-Salem in the Bryce Stewart building, where you pay your water. If you don't know where it is where you pay your water, and it will take place from the 8th of April to the 6th of May, give or take. When we're taping this is a little bit before these dates, but the expectation is that it will be there. This exhibit from the 8th of April to the 6th of May in the Bryce Stewart building. I hope you can attend. It's a very, very informative and instructive exhibit, as Mr. Gardner said. Will put in perspective some practices that, yes, they were, enforced many, many years ago in the, as Mr. Gardner said, started in the 30s, ended in the 70s, but the legacy of those practices are still very much with us today, unfortunately. And I hope this perspective this exhibit, puts that in perspective to the attending public. Mr. Gardner, thank you very much. Is there something else that you would like to add that we didn't touch on?
I think that's great. Thank you so much for your time, Adolfo. I really appreciate it. Well,
thank you very much for your time. This was Charlie Gardner. He's program officer at the Winston-Salem Foundation for Building an Inclusive Economy. And of course, this whole segment of Nexus was to invite you to this exhibit, the Undesigned, the Redline exhibit that will take place here at the city of Winston-Salem in the Bryce Stewart building for about a month, starting from the 8th of April to the 6th of May. So please, if you can be with us and tour this exhibit, you will not regret it. Thank you again, Mr. Gardner, for your time. Thank you all for still being with us in this edition of Nexus TV. We will be back with Jamie and the Nexus Challenge.
Fair housing law guarantees all citizens equal access to housing. Landlords may not segregate tenants based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, family status, or disability. If you think you have been discriminated against, call 311 and ask for the Human Relations Department. Fair housing, it's the law. A message from the Winston-Salem Human Relations Department.
I'm Jamie Cranfield, and this is the Nexus Challenge, where we test your knowledge about fair housing law. In honor of Fair Housing Month, during the month of April, this special edition of the Nexus Challenge will focus on explaining the protected classes under the Fair Housing Act. Let's start with a question. Which of the following is not a protected class under the Fair Housing Law? A, race, B, familial status, C, credit standing, or D, religion? The answer is C. Individuals cannot be denied housing on the basis of race, family status, or religion. However, they can be denied if they do not meet a housing provider or lender's credit requirements. There are 7 characteristics in total for which a housing provider cannot deny an individual. We have already discussed race, family status, and religion. The other 4 characteristics are color, gender, national origin, and disability. In honor of Fair Housing Month, we would like to give more detail on what these terms mean. Race and color. These are 2 separate but closely related characteristics. Race refers to a person's physical appearance, and color refers to the characteristics of a person's race. National origin. National origin is based on whether applicants or their families are from another country. Discrimination based on national origin means treating people differently because of their ancestry, ethnicity, birthplace, culture, or language. Religion. Religion refers to members of a particular faith or belief system and may also cover anyone based on spiritual beliefs, even if a person is not affiliated with a particular religious group. Sex. Sex refers to treating women or men differently based on gender. It also bans sexual harassment against both women and men. Disability. Disability refers to a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. However, individuals who currently use illegal drugs or pose a direct threat to the health and safety of others are not considered disabled under the Fair Housing Act. Family status. Family status refers to households with one or more children who are under 18 years of age, whether living with a parent, legal guardian, or anyone else with written permission. It also applies to pregnant women and anyone in the process of securing legal custody of a minor child, such as a foster or adoptive parent. And that's this month's Nexus Challenge. I'm Jamie Cranfield. Now let's go back to Wanda.
Thank you, Jamie. Before we go, here's a look at some upcoming events. Thank you for watching Nexus. I'm Wanda Allen Abraha. See you next time.